I want to talk about the interpretation of large-scale randomised evidence. I mean just randomise lots and lots of people in randomised trials, big randomised trials, and then putting them all together. And if when you put them all together, then you've got really big numbers, then it's large-scale randomised evidence. Sometimes, quite often, even a meta-analysis of all the trials that have ever been done isn't big enough. And a rough rule on sample size, if you're planning a new trial, what's the minimum sample size you've got to do? Well, the minimum is to be at least as big as all the rest of the evidence in the world put together. Because otherwise you're not going to double the world literature, and if you don't double the world literature, then you're not going to knock even 30% off the standard error. So you've got to be at least as big as everything else put together. And I'd like to give a few examples where that's been done, and then try and make sense of it. I want to give 4 examples, but I get through to 3, that'll suffice, because the third one's vitamin A. The key point is the subtitle here. It's that very often, if you're looking at serious outcomes, then, and you're uncertain as to which of 2 treatment strategies is better, then the real truth is either that there is no material difference between the 2 things you're considering, that it just doesn't matter, that stuff doesn't work, or if there is an effect, that it's likely to be a moderate effect. Now and then, you'll get some wonderful, fantastic relative risk. And, it may well be that some of the stuff we just saw is such a fantastic relative risk. But very often, we're in the business of trying to say, can you knock, say, 10%, 20% if you're lucky, off the risk of things going catastrophically wrong? And then you do need really large-scale randomised evidence. You need trials with thousands of endpoints, not thousands of patients, thousands of endpoints, just to get the play of chance down under control. And on top of that, you've got to avoid all the various biases that can come in. You've got to look at all the trials, not just the ones where you like the results. You've got to look generally at the overall results, not just at subgroups. Although my 4th example is actually an example where it's a subgroup analysis that gives the real answer, and the overall results don't. But this business about, what's the job of a trialist? It's the boring job of trying to sort out whether treatments are just fairly useless or totally useless. Yeah, that's about it. But you put a few treatments together which will have a moderate benefit, aspirin after a heart attack, and say diuretics to kind of keep your blood pressure down a bit, and then statins, and then more effective statins, and before you know where you are, you take off 10% here, 20% there, and finally you've got not more than 50% off the risk. Maybe you can, in fact, in the treatment of heart disease patients, maintenance treatment, you can knock about 3/4 off the risk. So moderate effects that are individually boring can add up. I mean, the reason why breast cancer death rates in this country have gone down by half since the 1980s, is because of lots of small gains, each so small individually as to look really boring, but overall, the breast cancer death rate in middle age is down to half of what it was 25 years ago. So moderate differences can be worth knowing about. If the treatments are practicable and they're going to apply to millions or tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of people, then yeah, you want to know about them. So if we're going for moderate differences, there's also kinds of technical things. There's actually one of those things where it says hide slide, and one of the things I did just before putting this in was to hide the previous slide because it was too busy. But I wanted two details from it. So there's all the things you've got to do, randomising and so on, were hidden and passed over. We need all the main trial results to avoid undue emphasis on particular studies. That's been routinely sought. I mean, the Cochrane collaboration obviously is a worldwide network for doing exactly that. Having got all the main trial results together, we need to avoid unduly data-dependent emphasis on particular subgroups. There are times when you have to look at subgroup results. Maybe professionals or sort of amateurs in Goa would be such an example. There's times where it's appropriate to look at particular subgroups, but most subgroup analyses that are done, whether they're pre-specified or not pre-specified, are absolute nonsense. With the trials overall, even the worldwide evidence may not be big enough to answer the question. And if you need a certain amount of data to measure the average treatment difference, how much more data are you going to need to ask whether in, say, males and females you get this much benefit in males and that much in females? You've got fewer of them, and you've got the random error of comparing the one with the other. And often you've got the intrinsic implausibility of it working, of a qualitative vast difference between what goes on in one subgroup and what goes on in another. So this generally, most trials don't answer the question they address. Even quite a lot of meta-analyses don't suffice to answer the question they address because the world literature isn't big enough. And if you do get it big enough, then people will finish up doing subgroup analyses. And if you've got a positive result, a definite overall positive result, say 3, 4, 5 standard errors, you can guarantee that some subgroup analysis is going to turn up with false negatives in some subgroups. It's a reliable, subgroup analyses are a moderately reliable way of getting false positives, but they're an absolutely reliable way of getting false negatives, always. Okay, so I'm not going to talk mostly about subgroups. I'll just note that and pass on. I want to talk now, mainly for the rest of this talk, except for the last example, which is subgroups, on the question of getting all the main trial results in. Now, I think, we've got this tradition of 2 standard errors is supposed to be interesting or significant, and, when you're doing your statistics exam, it says, right, is this result significant or not? I think we should be thinking about 3 standard error differences the way we now think about 2 standard error differences. They can happen. 3 standard error differences do happen by chance alone. And we look at so many p-values all the time. I mean, p-values were invented back early in the 20th century when a gentleman would, perhaps look at, 1 p-value a week, maybe only 1 p-value a month. Well, I get hundreds of p-values a day on my desk. And so you're bound to get nonsense, and then we'll get selective emphasis on the nonsense, and we just don't make enough allowance to the extent to which the play of chance will produce 3 standard error differences on things that look interesting, and then you'll get some theory to explain it afterwards. So, sure, if you've got directly what you're looking for and you get a 3 standard error difference in that, that's interesting, if it's absolutely the primary hypothesis. But, we're going to get so many things in subgroup effects, interactions, differences between one trial and another. There are 3 standard errors by chance. Okay, 4 standard errors, that's not going to happen by chance, but I think we should be shifting a notch. If you want to say what's really convincing, okay, 4 standard errors. Physicists say it's got to be 5 standard errors. The Higgs boson wasn't discovered until they were at 5 standard errors. But, we really need to take the play of chance more seriously as an explanation for trial results and anomalies in trial results. There's one thing I'd like to comment on, which is the problem with when you get a meta-analysis of small trials. Again and again, I've seen examples where meta-analysis, you get all the small trials you can lay hands on, put them all together, and they come up with a significant meta-analysis result. And it sort of, in retrospect, it turns out not to have been true, or not to have been really like that. I think that it is surprising how often things go wrong. And again, I think it comes down to the extent that we are looking at so many meta-analyses all the time that we can pick out. And I mean, there's a thing called Bayes' theorem, but essentially Bayes' theorem can be summarized that if it looks too good to be true, then it probably is. And that's all it is. And if you've got some treatment, it's producing some ridiculously favorable effect, well, trust your instincts. It probably isn't as good as that. And I'd like to give examples where, perfectly reasonable hypotheses really turned out not to be true. I'll give, the first one is the trials of magnesium as treatment for acute heart attack. There's lots of good physiological reasons why an infusion of magnesium might save your life and prevent you getting into catastrophic arrhythmias and so on when you're in the middle of an acute heart attack. Does it do so? Well, let's randomise. So a lot of small trials were done, and these small trials produced a result that was, highly significant in total. Then a moderate size, but they included only about 1,500 patients in about 10 trials. Then one larger trial was done, about 2,000 patients, and it was sort of not clearly significantly different from 0, but also not clearly significantly different from what the small ones had done. And then we did a trial that was something like 20 times as big as all the rest of them put together, and just was really well done, and it just showed that it doesn't work. And it's just an interesting example. I'll put it up in summary. Here is the trials we knew of at the time. In fact, in retrospect, there's about a dozen small trials. Okay, total of 86 versus 42 deaths. Well, that's pretty good, isn't it? Look at the confidence interval. Now, these are randomised trials. They were reported as randomised trials, and I think they probably were. And it's too good to be true. Then there was the Leicester trial, limit 2, and, well, there's its result, 118 versus 90. That looks good. I mean, take them together with the small trials. I mean, surely that's convincing. Have you just got that? But then came the ISIS-4 trial, where really it was well done, well controlled, and it finished up with 2,100 deaths versus 2,200. It was by chance, it was the wrong way round. And it was well done. It's got investigated every which way round. It was well done. And so the grand total now, all these trials were evenly randomised, is 2,300 versus 2,300 deaths, actually slightly more with magnesium than without. So nothing, absolutely nothing, a relative risk of 1.02. Now, why? What went wrong? Well, of course, the big trial was done only because the small trials looked so good. We tried to get magnesium into ISIS-3, and they said, no, the trials that have been done don't look promising enough to justify putting it into a big trial. But then, because the small trials got stronger, because they looked more favourable, then it was done in ISIS-4. Now, people argued while ISIS-4 was in... Tom Chalmers, who's now dead, wrote to Paul Meyer, who was on the data monitoring committee on ISIS-4, and said, look, you're participating in something as unethical as the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. It's always Tuskegee syphilis or Mengele for some reason. And, it's your moral responsibility to stop this trial. And he said, if we do a meta-analysis, then even no matter what the result of the ISIS-4 trial, the meta-analysis will still be significantly in favour of magnesium. We've tried putting, of course, that's because he does random effects meta-analysis, which produces Mickey Mouse answers. But with a random effects meta-analysis, it's true. Random effects meta-analysis still says, if you feed all these numbers into it, that magnesium reduces heart disease death rates by 1/3 with a p-value of 0.001. But that's just that, random effects meta-analysis should never be done by strictly licensed practitioners, and generally as teaching examples as to why not. And you can look at a lot more detail on these trials. Here you are, there's the sort of usual fuzz. There's the small trials we knew about, there's the ones we didn't know about, there's LIMIT, and there's ISIS-4. And then the Americans did one, because the Americans were certain that we'd blown it and that they were going to do it properly. And there was all kinds of abusive correspondence. They did it, and then when they found that that was the answer, they were really convinced that they had shown that the ordinary weighted effects meta-analysis was the right answer, and this stuff doesn't work. But it's a cautionary tale. If we've got so many meta-analyses that we do, that lot and that together would be regarded as completely convincing, and yet it was a wrong answer. I'm not sure exactly. I'll give another one where actually a meta-analysis of small trials gave a right answer. Okay, this is fibrotic, so clotbusters and acute heart attack. Meta-analysis of small trials then got confirmed by the big trials. So the evidence beforehand was about the same as for magnesium. It's the same condition, but in this case, when the big trial was done, it confirmed it. I'll show you the big trials first. And I'll show you the meta-analysis first. There you are. There's a great fuzz of things, as usual. And overall, it looks as though giving clotbusters in the middle of an acute heart attack knocks about 22% off your risk of being dead. And that's true. These are all the small trials, total about 5,000-6,000 patients. And then big trials, total of about 60,000 patients, 45,000 of them whom had ST elevation or bundle branch block. And if you plot the absolute gain versus how quickly you got the clotbuster in, if you wait till about 2 days, then it's going to be too late to try and clear out any blockage. What people used to say, that you had to actually get it in within the first 2 or 3 hours, because that's what was necessary in animal experiments to have any benefit. But if you just plot the results, so each of these is a separate meta-analysis, so it's a nice result. And so this is an example where that previous one was very strongly confirmed when 10 times more evidence got generated. Okay, now I want to come to my third example. And of course, there's one person in this audience, Betty Kirkwood, who knows what the real story on this is, but I don't. It's vitamin A supplementation and child mortality. There's a meta-analysis of small trials that suggested that you can knock about 20-30% off child mortality if you just give vitamin A supplements every 6 months to kids in poor countries where there's, a few percent Peto spots, where there's a few percent have got severe vitamin A deficiency, just by the conventional definition, biochemical. Then, just by 6 monthly supplementation, 1 vitamin A capsule every 6 months, you can knock about 20-30% off child mortality. And this is based on a meta-analysis of small trials. And when the big trial was done, the meta-analysis changes And the effect seems to be only half as great. I mean, of course, even the meta-analysis has got confidence intervals, so somewhere between a quarter as great and three-quarters as great, as had been believed. And I want to describe this trial. It was published online in The Lancet last month. It'll be out on the 27th of this month in the printed issue of The Lancet, and it's caused a lot of argument for various reasons. And I want to describe this big trial in general. It's the biggest trial ever done. It's 1 million kids. So 6 monthly vitamin A, 1 to 6 years of age. It was cluster randomised, so it's 36 clusters versus 36 clusters. Each cluster is about the size of Oxford. So it's 72 Oxfords. 36 Oxfords get vitamin A, 36 Oxfords don't. And you get the details in The Lancet. OK, it's up in Uttar Pradesh. It's in these districts of Uttar Pradesh, and it takes 72 administrative blocks in these 7 districts. So this trial spans about, 1 degree of longitude and 3 degrees of latitude, or something like that. And there was good compliance. So, the Anganwadi system there, it's working through the existing Anganwadi system. The kids, there is child, actually, most of them would be younger. These young ones here are the most relevant, because they're the ones who actually have the child mortality. But it's working through the existing system. We wanted something that we wanted to actually show that it could be given. And we wanted also to demonstrate the effect, because although when this study started, previous meta-analysis existed saying that you could knock a quarter off child mortality, nobody was doing it in this area. OK, so preschool kids, age 1 to 6, 1.0 to 6.0, in rural North India, vitamin A deficiency is common. 2 or 3% die in the age range 1 to 6, mostly acute infection. Can 6 monthly vitamin A reduce this mortality? And 72 clusters, 36 randomly allocated vitamin A, 36 randomly allocated open control. And the villages were all visited every 6 months to monitor all child deaths. And 25,000 child deaths were reported. But because it's cluster randomised, this has the power, the statistical power, of an individually randomised trial with only 3,000 child deaths. Still, it's not bad. It gives you a standard error of 0.03 for your relative risk. So, and this is actually, these are a bit smaller, that's more relevant. That one with the white hair is me rather than one of the kids. But they came along and, they advertised before what day they were going to give the vitamin A. They came in, it was, the mothers brought the kids in. It was done pretty well. And then in a quarter of all the villages, we got our motorbike riders to make unannounced arrivals on the day the vitamin A was supposed to be distributed. And they found pretty well always it was being. And then we'd also do visits to the villages a week afterwards to find out whether it had been given, and the mothers said it had, so did the Anganwadi workers. And then we chose in Oxford one village at random out of each block every year and sent a 4-wheeler with a medical team to that village and, weighed and measured the kids, measured their blood retinol, and again asked the parents whether the vitamin A had been given, and in general it had. So, the thing worked as a machine for delivering vitamin A to some and not others. So overall, we estimate about 86% compliance with vitamin A. Pulse polio got done with reasonably good coverage halfway through the trial, and they gave pulse polio with 1 shot of vitamin A. So the controls got 1 shot of vitamin A in the 5-year period of the trial, whereas the vitamin A group got 9.5 doses on average, 10 or 10 doses on average. And the deaths were counted. So OK, it's a study, it's a trial, that's all. Trials never are perfect. And did it actually have any effect on blood retinol? Yes. So the prevalence of severe deficiency went down from 13% down to 6%. Did it have any effect on the prevalence of Peto spots? Yes, 3.5% down to 1.4%. This is in the 1 village per block that was randomly. So, in other words, the treatment got given. It did what it was supposed to do, and yet it was 2.6% mortality versus 2.5%. 2p, it was 0.22, not significant. Relative risk, 0.96, with a standard error of 0.03. So this was really not what we'd been wanting. We wanted to show that this stuff really worked and that this was a practical way of giving it at essentially zero cost, zero administrative cost. Of course, the problem with cluster randomization is here are the death rates in each of the 72 clusters. Here's the control clusters, here's the vitamin A clusters, and there's quite a lot of scatter between the rates in the different blocks anyway. I mean, you adjust for some of that scatter by adjusting for infant mortality, because infant mortality is a jolly strong correlate of child mortality, and we weren't treating the infants. So that'll, there's a nice 2/3 correlation between infant and child mortality in the same block, but still, there's this variation. That's why, effectively, we had 3,000 deaths instead of 25,000. And, of course, the analyses that I'm going to come to in a minute allow for clustering. OK, and when we look down at particular causes of death, well, who knows how reliably these causes were assigned, but anyway, we didn't see anything significant on any particular cause of death. So that 22.5% versus 2.6%, a difference of 0.1% in a 5-year risk of death. Well, subgroups, male and female, no apparent difference. Were they being dewormed or not? No difference. Ages 1 to 2, ages 3 to 6, no significant difference in the relative risk. So, what do we make of it? We got a relative risk of 0.96 with this 99% confidence interval. And this is a 99% confidence interval. This is one trial. It's not all the evidence. 99% confidence interval, 0.87 to 1.05. So maybe mortality can be reduced by 10%, even though 13% would be at the extreme end of the confidence interval. It's consistent both with no effect on mortality and with prevention of more than 10% of all mortality. That's what that confidence interval says. So we can't look at DEVTRA on its own. We've got to consider it together with the other trials, which collectively show definite benefit. And they're not very different, in most cases, in circumstances, in terms of vitamin A deficiency, from ours. So we've got these trials showing definite benefit, our trial failing to do so, but like the other trials with a confidence interval. What about it? Well, we'll do a meta-analysis. Here's us, 0.96, 99% confidence interval, 87 to 105. There's the 8 others, relative risk 0.77, 99% confidence interval, 0.68 to 0.89. Put them together, take a weighted average of them. Now, people talk about fixed effects meta-analysis. It's deliberately misleading terminology. It was intended to be misleading. It was intended to sort of rubbish this method of combining evidence from different trials. We just take a weighted average of the results in the different studies, weighted in proportion, well, inversely weighted in relation to the variance of the result. So the more accurate a trial, the greater weight it gets. So we take a weighted average of us and them, and we finish up with 0.89, which isn't really contradicted by either body of data. Now, there's an interaction, though. I mean, if you say, is our relative risk the same as theirs? Well, there's a 0.001 interaction. And I've looked at this every which way around, and my view eventually is that it probably is, largely or wholly, due to the play of chance. We called a meeting of the trialists of all the other trials to try and discuss the thing, to try and see if they could point out why this should happen. And I think that an extreme play of chance is the most plausible explanation, although obviously if somebody can come up with something better, that would be more fun. But I think these things do happen, and we've got to be ready for them. You can do this by a usual forest plot where you can see all the different trials. There's the previous trials. That's all other 8 trials put together. That's us. And there's the weighted average. Now, again, it comes down to that we're trying to monitor moderate differences. That weighted average suggests an 11% reduction. Well, is it an 11% reduction? Is it no reduction? Is it a 20% reduction? We really need to know. We need to know these things with standard errors, which are of the order of 0.02 or something like that. And yet, look at the trials. Look at the previous trials. Look how long the confidence intervals are on them. I mean, we're trying to measure the difference between a solid vertical line and a dotted vertical line, or possibly twice that. And they're just too small. I mean, this is the best of them. This is the Ghanaian trial that was run from here in collaboration with the London School of Hygiene. But still, it's too small. It's too small if what we need really large-scale randomised evidence. Is there a 10, 15% reduction produced by this? I think probably yes, because there are also placebo-controlled trials showing that vitamin A intervention does improve your ability to fight certain diseases quite substantially. So I think there's a quite strong prior that there is a real effect, and the meta-analysis shows an effect. Now, the trouble is that the vitamin A field has become extremely polarised. There are the gung-ho vitamin A enthusiasts who claim this. In fact, some of them claim that these previous trials underestimated the benefit. It can actually halve child mortality. So you've got the enthusiasts who claim this, and you've got the nihilists who claim this. and they're really vituperative about each other. And, you know, we finished up in the middle, and now they're all of them vituperative about us. It's, I don't know, but I think that the meta-analysis is, and, you know, the ones who keep saying that there's nothing going, they don't want to accept the meta-analysis. It's what Paul Garner calls belief disconfirmation bias, their refusal to accept the meta-analysis. But the same is true of the other ones as well. Anyway, that's the state of the evidence, but fortunately Betty's got another trial to add to this lot. I just hope that it's got a lot of endpoints, because it's going to influence this meta-analysis to the extent to which it's got a lot of endpoints. We'll see when the results get unblinded and reported. I just want to stress, we're not assuming that the relative risk is the same in all these studies. That is not an assumption when you take a weighted average of their results. We're testing, it just isn't an assumption. When trials are being combined, I don't see why the relative risk should be the same in all trials. I mean, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It's just that our tests of heterogeneity are so crude that they're just not worth reading. Anyway, so that's that story, and I'd like to try and acknowledge, well, what's it taken to us? Okay, what's the change produced by depth from the totality of the evidence? The mortality reduction is still highly significant in the weighted average, but it's much more likely to be about 5 to 15%, that's the confidence interval for the meta-analysis, than as previously estimated 20 to 30%. So it's somewhere around a quarter or half of the previous estimate. So of the order of half the previous estimate, I'd say, if you took the point estimates. But I think we should take the confidence intervals, not the point estimates. Okay, that's Shally, who was the principal investigator of the study, and this is Angawadi workers, all usual. Okay, I want to try and deal with one other question, and this is the rectal artesunate trials. Artesunate is the dream drug for malaria. You give, you know, one dose of artesunate. Just with one dose of artesunate, you can knock 99% off the parasite count within 24 hours. And what's more, if you can't swallow it, they can be injected subcutaneously, intravenously, or rectally. You know, you can just, any way you do, it's in the blood quickly. And then, although there's no effect, well, almost no effect on the parasite count 4 hours later, you know, by the time you get to 12 hours later, it's down to a quarter of what it was. And by the time you get out to 24 hours later, it's down to 1% of what it was. So this is just, these are results from taking kids with mild malaria, so you can actually observe them, and just putting in a single artesunate gel capsule into their bum. It breaks up within minutes, it's in the bloodstream fairly fast, and it doesn't affect the parasite count 4 hours later, but it does affect the parasite count 12 hours later. Now, the point about rectal treatment, as opposed to, you know, if you can't swallow, and you're in a village where nobody can give an injection because there aren't any clinics, then you can put a rectal gel capsule into the kid's bottom. It's easy. You just have to hold the bottom closed for about 10 minutes afterwards to make sure it doesn't get shot out. Actually, the first one that they tried, it did. It just came out, it's a stream of green shit right across the room. Anyway, but now, if the kids, now, you can go very fast from being fairly normal into being catastrophically ill, into being comatose with irreversible brain damage. And if you're in a village and it's like afternoon is coming on, you can't travel at nights, then, you know, what are you going to do? Well, you could use this treatment in villages. So it's developed by WHO for use in areas where you can't give injections. The kid can this is usually kids, the kid can no longer swallow, you can't give injections, so you just give like this, hold the bum shut, and it's in the blood, and the parasite count goes down. It doesn't cure them. If you don't do anything else, then the parasite count's going to come up again. But it does give some respite. It gives 12, 24 hours respite. It gives so you can get other treatments. Maybe they'll get well enough that you can start treating orally, or they'll just be okay enough to get to clinic. But the idea was that this would be something you give and then refer the kid to clinic for proper treatment. Also, if you think it's malaria in the village, it might not be. It might be pneumonia or meningitis, in which case you want to get to a clinic, get the right diagnosis and get the right medicine. So not everything thought to be malaria is malaria. So a trial was going to be done of rectal artesunate, and it was a mighty effort. It was done in Africa and Asia, Bangladesh and Africa. And it's unfortunately in Asia, when it was done, they went and they intervened so intensively in the villages where it was being done. They got all the local hospitals on high alert, ready to admit anybody who was coming from this trial with 3 days of free treatment, free drugs, free antimalarials, free broad-spectrum antibiotics, all the clinical care, and as soon as they got recruited in the village, they got sent straight to the clinics. Now, this lasted only as long as the trial, and as soon as the trial ended, all these services fell to pieces because they were just sustained by WHO trial money. But of course, that meant that the median time to get into clinic in Bangladesh was 2 hours. Well, you know, what is rectal artesunate versus placebo, and then 2 hours later, everybody gets injections? That is not a fair test of the treatment. And they got 45 dead or permanently disabled versus 45 dead or permanently disabled. They got 45 versus 45 in Bangladesh because they produced a completely artificial situation. In Africa, you know, a fair number of them took 6 hours or 12 hours to get to the clinic. And apart from anything else, you can't travel at night between villages there. And so there are a fair number, still a minority, where it was a fair test of the hypothesis. So, but it's only those ones. And of course, the other thing is that they tried to take a blood spot before the kids came. 93% of them, there was a blood spot. And so you can look in the blood spot, and if in the blood spot, with really careful microscopy, you see absolutely zero parasites, this is by laboratory examination, you know, weeks or months later, then you know for sure that whatever was causing that fever wasn't malaria. So there's no possibility of the treatment working. So we've got this funny trial, 18,000 randomised, beautiful placebo-controlled, fantastic follow-up. But first, a third of them had zero parasites, definitely didn't have malaria. And, okay. Right, I've got two more. And a lot of the others got to hospital so fast that they couldn't actually benefit. It's only about a sixth of them was still alive and out of hospital 6 hours later. Okay, so this is the Lancet report of the thing, pre-referral rectal artesunate to prevent death and disability, and there's the conclusion. If patients with severe malaria cannot be treated orally, access to injections will take several hours. A single inexpensive artesunate suppository at the time of referral substantially reduces the risk of death or permanent disability. Good. And, you know, theirs died quickly, arrived at injection facility quickly. You don't see any particular gain. You don't see any loss. But then the ones who are still not in injection facility after more than 6 hours, 29 versus 57 dead or disabled, so good. That's a subgroup analysis. And the FDA wouldn't allow us this subgroup analysis, they said, because it depended on measurements made after randomization, so that was against their principles. And they instead insisted on some other subgroup analysis. But so we said, OK, well, let's at least look at young kids and older patients separately. And so they said, OK, it was unblinded, and then their advisory committee advised them to take it. And the FDA overruled it and said no. So these are the bars that describe what I just showed you. There's the benefit in the ones who still weren't in a clinic more than 6 hours after the thing had got put up them. And it's been rejected by the FDA. Approval has not been given, because they then subdivided the Bangladesh results into older patients and younger patients. And what do we get? 45 versus 45 in Bangladesh with no treatment effect, as you'd expect. But it was 14 versus 31 in the younger patients and 31 versus 14 in the older patients. Well, it's a significant interaction, and there's a significant hazard in the older patients. And so FDA has got to reject the application on safety grounds, and that's where it stands at the moment. OK, well, let's hope that that will change. It's going through FDA appeal process now, and we are at fault because we've delayed getting the stuff back to them that they asked us to get last time. So that's this summer's work. Anyway, that's the main one I wanted to put up as a point for discussion. Peter, what do you think of it? Thank you, Richard.